Dean Allison, esteemed faculty and administration, students and guests, I'm both honored and humbled by the invitation of Dean Allison to participate in this ongoing series of public affairs forums. When I read the list of past speakers and some of the future speakers that you're going to have here, I felt like the man I heard about in my part of the country who decided to enter his mule in the Kentucky Derby. And they said, "You don't expect your mule to win, do you?" And he said, "No, but look at the company he'll be in." And that's the way I feel, a little bit like that. But I don't come here tonight to pretend that I know all the answers or that I'm an expert or even a philosopher on the theory of government or a scholar or even a theologian, by what we mean by theologians today. I make no pretense of being any of these. I am, as you know, a Christian clergyman. I'm called an evangelist. I used to resent that term, evangelist, because it conjured up ideas of emotionalism, anti-intellectualism, anti-church, brimstone and hell, and so forth. But then as I began to study the word, I began to realize that it was used in the old Greek city-states for an announcer. They didn't have newspapers or television in those days, so they had a man that would go around and announce the news. And that word was carried over into the New Testament called evangelist, an announcer in the New Testament sense of good news, of what is called the gospel. And that's what I became. And I confess that I've not always seen many of the complexities that are involved in the subject that I'm assigned tonight. I'm still learning. I'm on a pilgrimage. The more I learn, the less dogmatic I become about some of them. My stance, as you know, is that of a Christian who takes the Bible seriously. Now, I realize that this may not be your perspective, and we may not come out exactly the same place always because we may start from different perspectives and reference points. But it is unfortunate that we often fail to see what each other's assumptions are, and often we do not even seriously examine them. I heard about a bridge that was being built in Pennsylvania some years ago, and it was written up in one of the magazines. And the workers started building from both sides, and when they reached the middle of the waterway, they found that they were 13 feet apart. And each crew had started by using a different reference point to begin their work, and the result, of course, was inevitable. We live in a highly complex world, and one which is also very fragile. We are the first generation to realize that we may well be the last generation. You may be the last generation on this planet. With this in mind, let me tonight briefly state 4 affirmations concerning this subject. First, I believe that political decisions have an inescapable moral and ethical dimension to them. Hitler's decisions about racial superiority and the final solution involved a moral decision. The situation in El Salvador today involves serious questions about justice, the treatment of the poor, and the use and abuse of power in our world. The racial situation in Southern Africa involves a host of grave ethical and moral questions which cannot be evaded. Many other examples could be cited, including a vast array of economic, social, and human rights issues in our own nation. The question of rightness and wrongness simply will not go away, but it is at the heart of every major issue that we face in the world today. Secondly, government is not an end in itself, but it is to be a servant to bring about greater peace and justice for the good of humanity. I know this is general, but when this goal of government is perverted, government becomes corrupt or totalitarian or both. As a Christian, I believe God has given the institution of government to humanity for our good. The Apostle Paul stated, the person in political authority is God's servant to do good, an agent of justice. I believe we must keep clearly before us the goal or purpose of government, or it will easily become perverted. Thirdly, there are certain moral principles which as a Christian I support and urge as guidelines in determining the right course of action. I know, of course, that this is the nub of the whole problem because it is one thing to acknowledge that political decisions have a moral dimension and a different and vastly complex thing to reach any agreement on what those moral guidelines are. One of the great problems to which we seem not to address ourselves seriously is the problem of what is right and what is wrong. Who sets the moral standards? Who says it's wrong? Who says it's right? As individuals or as a society? The State Highway Department of Pennsylvania made a mistake when they did not have guidelines, when they did not take the reference points that were available to them in building that bridge, and we could do the same thing. I personally hold the basic principles of the Ten Commandments because I believe the Creator has given them to us. But I believe that they were given to us because they will bring about what is best for human society. And so I accept the Ten Commandments, the Sermon on the Mount, and the Golden Rule as the moral guidelines for our lives. Whether we live by them or not is another question. Fourthly, I would suggest that government is only good as those who govern. A man who has no regard for integrity in his personal and business relations will normally not have any regard for integrity if he becomes a political leader. Government will never be better than the men and women who have given their lives to it, and they never will be better than the world and life view they accept and on which they operate. Either the law of love will prevail, or the law of hatred, violence, and dishonesty will prevail. I've also been on a pilgrimage as far as the arms race is concerned. I believe that the human race sits under the nuclear sword of Damocles. The world is facing the most critical moment since creation. Never before has mankind held in its hands such awesome weapons of mass destruction that could destroy life on this planet within a matter of hours. Man's technology has leaped far ahead of his moral ability to control his technology. Now I have shared with you some of my pilgrimage, and I'm sure that many of you have had something of a pilgrimage in your own lives as you have realized the problems of our world, your own problems, your own dilemmas, your own search for purpose and meaning of life, and the responsibility every human being has to work towards solutions. But this evening, I would like to invite you on another pilgrimage, a pilgrimage which is spiritual in nature. It would be tragic if you were to spend a lifetime pursuing success or fame or material gains or humanitarian ideals or any other goal, worthy as it may be, and yet were to omit the greatest pilgrimage of all, the pilgrimage of the Spirit. I remember when Mr. Outhant retired as Secretary General of the United Nations, they had a banquet in his honor. And he stood up that evening, and the first thing he said, everything I have ever been and am today, or ever hope to be, I owe to Buddha. Now, there weren't many Buddhists there, but everyone in that room respected him for the dedication to his own faith and for declaring it openly and boldly before that particular group. And I want to declare to you tonight that I believe that Jesus Christ is who he claims to be, and that I would like to challenge you to study his life. When I was at Yale, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, giving a series of lectures at Wolseley Hall, the head of the law, I've forgotten society, what the name of the society was now, but he invited me to lunch with the cabinet. And I went to lunch, and he told me he was an atheist. I said, have you ever read the New Testament? He said, no. I said, you have rejected Christ? He said, yes. I said, and you have never read his life, never read his biography? No. I said, that doesn't seem to be quite honest and intellectually fair. And I said, I want to challenge you to read the New Testament and to read it in the next 6 months. Would you do it? And the other fellows around said, now he's challenged you. And they kidded him, and finally he said, I'll do it. And he wrote me a letter. He said, I'm no longer an atheist. He said, I'd rather call myself an agnostic. He said, I don't really know. That's what agnosticism is, of course. I don't really know. But he had at least taken that step. And he said, I'm going to continue reading because he said, you're right about one thing. It does something to you. And he said, it's doing something to me, and I'm not quite sure I like what it's doing. He said, I'm disturbed. And so I call upon you to do the same. I know that we're a pluralistic group here tonight, and I know you come from many religious backgrounds, and I would in no way impose my thoughts on you except to give you what I believe, because that's what a university is all about. We hear different points of view, different religious leaders, political leaders, economic leaders, and so forth, and we hear discussions, and we should discuss, and we should debate, and we should even argue. That's what it's all about. And I thank you for giving me a hearing tonight. God bless you.